Hello and welcome to Good Conversations. My name is Thompson Smith. We're honored to have with us today Germaine White, the Information and Education Specialist for the Natural Resource Department of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. She served in that capacity for 5 years and before that in numerous other positions for the tribes. She worked in cultural resource management for the Tribal Preservation Department, and before that she was the founder of the Cultural Resource Protection Program for the Salish Pend Culture Committee, where she worked for 10 years. She's represented the tribes on numerous state and national boards, and before that received her BA from the University of Montana and her master's in multicultural bilingual education from MSU Billings. Welcome, Germaine. Thank
you, Tom. I'm delighted to be here.
Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it. It's interesting in talking about the work you've done for the tribes. It spanned the gamut of cultural and environmental issues, and for your career and also in tribal culture, there are deep connections between cultural and environmental health, aren't there? There
are profoundly important connections there. I think natural and cultural resources are like twin sisters. I had that first experience when we were working with, when I was working with elders in bringing them to the Tribal Council in discussion of the Mission Mountains tribal wilderness. And they talked about this exquisitely beautiful natural resource in terms of all of its cultural values. And I think from the very beginning of my work in cultural resources, I knew that natural and cultural resources were really inseparable.
It brings to mind for me the story that I've heard you mention before about the effort to protect the Mission Mountain wilderness and the role of cultural elders in that process. You were involved in that in some way, weren't you?
Just in a very peripheral way. There were so many people involved in it. I think that we reached the tipping point in mass. You know, of course, Thurman Trosper was in Washington and very involved in wilderness, and Clarence Woodcock was here and really informing the cultural conversation about how valuable the Mission Mountains were for us today and how they were really a legacy that was handed to us, a keepsake that we were entrusted with, that we had a responsibility to pass on to future generations. So, and Doug Allard, I was working with Doug Allard at the time. He was in the Indian art business and having auctions across the country. And we developed a petition and circulated it, and there were many people involved. And of course, David Rockwell, the first wilderness manager, was at the university and developed a case study, and so there were many, many voices. But I think that the elders' trip to the Tribal Council meeting, I believe it was in August of 1975, and I had the privilege of accompanying them at that time when they talked with the Tribal Council, the three Yayas, the three sisters, Christine Woodcock and Louise McDonald and Annie Pierre. Really, for me, that was a formative time because they talked about how fundamentally important this resource was for us from the very beginning of time until the end of time.
And in a real sense then, the well-being of these plants and animals and the land itself, the water, the air, is vital to the well-being and future well-being of the culture then.
Absolutely. And I think that the important thing for us to remember is that everything we do, how we behave, how we act, affects the land, affects the water. And so my work in cultural resources for 15 years, I think, was a good foundation for working in natural resources.
And why don't you describe that job now and what exactly you do within the structure of the Natural Resource Department, which is a very large department.
It is, and I'm so delighted to be working in the Natural Resources Department. I work in the Division of Fish, Wildlife, Recreation, Conservation, so I say that if it has to do with fins, fur, feathers, fun, I'm there, I'm all over it. But during the Kerr licensure renewal, when the negotiations began in 1980 and when the license was renewed in 1985, the resource managers at that time felt that Natural Resource Department not only had a responsibility for managing the resource, so for managing fisheries, wildlife, wildland recreation, our division not only manages those resources, but we manage the use of those resources. And the most elegant way to do that is to combine information and education with conservation or enforcement. So there are 10 game wardens and then that enforce the ordinances about hunting, fishing, recreation. And then I get to inform and educate people. So it is my great pleasure to bring informational material to the public and to work with schools and to develop some educational initiatives. We have some great outdoor environmental education events. And
we'll be talking about a couple of those in a moment. But do you find that most of your time and work goes into educating the public about tribal efforts to protect the resource or about the resource itself? In other words, say about fishing regulations or about the fish, the bull trout or the lake trout or whatever?
You know, we try to do both. If you can educate people about what our expectations are, if we can tell people about what we value in terms of natural resources and how we're managing it and why we're managing it, why we are good natural resource managers as tribes, and encourage people to support our management efforts, then we're way down the road in terms of reaching our management goals.
I see, and I would guess that if the public understands more about, say, the life cycle of bull trout, they'll realize that there are good reasons for the regulations the tribes are trying to put in place to protect those fish or other fish.
The tribe's goal is really to manage and sustain populations, so to restore and sustain populations of native fish. So it's our focus to manage those resources. And I think when we educate people about what an important role bull trout have and how we've reserved the right to maintain those populations through treaties, those fundamental documents that are time-honored. When we tell people about how important the native fish species are, and that's our goal, to manage those in the Natural Resource Department, in the Fisheries Program, I think that's the first step in allowing people to really understand about bull trout. And when they understand, then an education experience has actually taken place. And with that understanding, they can assist us with our management goals.
And the same would hold true, obviously, for other plants or animals.
Wildlife, and
sure.
Yes.
Let's switch gears a little bit now, if you would. And I'd like to hear, it's been in the news a little bit lately about the bison hunt in Yellowstone, the involvement of different tribes in that hunt. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Oh, I'd be delighted to. I think about it and how remarkable it is to imagine tribal member hunters looking out across the buttes, the plains, on open and unclaimed land, and treaty reserved, where we have treaty reserved rights to hunt, and to have small hunting parties go out and harvest bison for their families. It's just remarkable. And what's so astonishing about this very successful hunt that we had this 2007-2008 permit hunt season is that this is the first time that tribal members have hunted off-reservation wild bison since, well, you're the historian, you can tell me better than I can, but maybe the 1880s.
At
yes,
the latest, yeah.
Absolutely. So isn't that remarkable? And
historic.
Yeah, it is. It is a profoundly historic event, and I just think that a great deal of credit needs to go to our tribal game wardens, Tom McDonald, for his work in helping provide information to the Tribal Council in 2005 when the state established a bison hunt and offered all of the 8 tribes in the state two permits to hunt under state law. And the Tribal Council said, thank you, no, we will not hunt under state law. We have reserved treaty rights to hunt, and began the process of negotiation for restoration of off-reservation wild bison permit hunts. And the council was very thoughtful about the process of reestablishing this hunt for tribal members. They sought guidance from the both culture committees and the elders' cultural advisory councils. They met with people that had hunted bison in the past. That had assisted in the ship and slaughter removal of bison for the benefit of elders programs or Head Start early childhood education programs. So there were tribal members that had been to West Yellowstone or to the Gardner area to participate in those hunts before. So the council gathered a tremendous amount of information. Then we promulgated regulations. We had public hearings. And one of the things, of course, that I applaud, one of the decisions that I applaud the Tribal Council for was that they made the decision that before we go and hunt, there will be an orientation process so we can provide our tribal member hunters all of the information they need. So
they need in order to what?
Have
to avoid
a successful
having
hunt.
Have a successful hunt. And
exactly.
A successful hunt defined as, I mean, not just getting a buffalo, but I assume there also could be some concerns about it kind of unfolding in a good way.
Absolutely.
So that a good opportunity isn't kind of lost.
You know, an average large bull bison weighs approximately 2,000 pounds. An average large bull elk weighs approximately 700 pounds. So in terms of scale, most of our hunters have hunted deer, elk, moose, have hunted big game. We're big game hunters, but it really takes a hunting party. I told folks that I recommended they take five hunting buddies with them. And I hunt with Chib Espinoza. Do you know the size and scale of Chib? I said, right. I would recommend you bring 5 people about Chib's size with you to help you harvest this bison. The temperatures are extreme, and it is a harsh environment. And so to be able to ensure that there's not waste of game, to maintain the tribal values that we have for hunting, the council wanted to provide as much information to hunters so they could have a good and successful hunt.
And before we take a break here, let's back up a moment and just, if you could say a bit about the tribal relationship with buffalo, because many people among the public, I think of the Salish and Pondere and Kootenai people as a west of the mountains tribe and buffalo as kind of an east of the mountains thing.
Oh, that's, Tom, what a great question. I should pay you for that. That was really good. You know, environmentalists talk about ecotones, places where 2 ecosystems come together. So a wetlands and a riparian area, and another kind of ecosystem. We are really ecotone people. So we live at the backbone of the world, and we have one foot in plains culture, where we historically hunted bison since the very beginning of our elders' recollection, and their ancestors before that. And we also have one foot in the plateau tradition of being root gatherers and anglers, harvesting fish. So we are those extraordinarily rich cultural people that were both plains people and plateau people. And we have, the elders talk about a long tradition of bison hunting. So the remarkable thing about the 2007-2008 wild bison off-reservation permit hunt is that we restored that tradition of big game hunting of bison. And I don't know that we'll ever have an opportunity again to restore a big game hunt.
That's fantastic.
It
Well,
is.
we'll talk a bit more about that after a quick break here. We'll be gone for just 1 minute. Please don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We're having a great conversation today with Germaine White of the tribe's Natural Resource Department. We've been discussing the bison hunt that Germaine has helped organize in the Yellowstone Park area that tribal members have been taking part in. And she was touching a bit before our break on the tribe's historic relationship with it. And Germaine, your comments really reminded me of the trip we did at the Culture Committee with elders to the Musselshell River country, of course, one of the really important historic buffalo hunting areas for the Salish and Pend Oreille people, and possibly Kootenai too. I'm not as familiar with their history, but this hunt that you helped organize really touched back on that historic relationship, and in a way was historic in itself, as you were mentioning.
Absolutely, Tom. And you know, I was a small part of a large team that worked really closely to ensure that we had a successful hunt and that we could assist the state with their problem. You know, the bison outmigrate from Yellowstone. They come to a lower elevation in the wintertime where there are more grasses available. Montana Department of Livestock has a concern that bison will be a disease vector, that they will transfer brucellosis to livestock. And so they have
and Montana has a brucellosis-free status, so that's a big concern of the cattle industry.
That is a huge concern of the cattle industry. And that's really been a concern that the tribes have had. Early in the season, bison are managed, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks manages a hunt. Later in the season, when there's the risk of transfer of brucellosis during calving, they become disease vectors. So it's kind of difficult to understand Montana's management of bison, but the reality is that this year the park estimated that there were 4,600 bison. They estimate that they have range capacity for about 3,500. So all of the federal agencies that manage bison were confident that there would be a significant outmigration of bison. So we were there to help them with that problem. We can help them reduce the numbers.
Sure. And what happens to the meat and the hides that are harvested?
Well, during the hunt, the small hunting parties went over. They harvested the bison, and I continued to talk with friends of mine that had permits to go over and told them that I thought that it would be a good idea to assess a fee, an educational fee, and they could bring me a sample and I'd taste it. And most of the, they ended up in the freezers of families here on the reservation.
I see. But it was the personal family hunting parties. It wasn't
a
tribal institutional.
No, it wasn't an administrative hunt. It was individual tribal members went as hunting parties, went in groups as hunting parties. And
well, that's really interesting, and I hope we have a chance to talk more about the bison hunt in the future. There's so much more to it, as you were mentioning to me off camera.
Absolutely, and it's been, I'm so pleased that this first year it went without incident and tribal members were able to harvest bison. It is restoring a cultural tradition, and we're helping in managing the resource.
But meanwhile, you
Yes.
have your hands in so many interesting issues. I'd like to touch on a few more of them if we can. Let's talk a bit about the river honoring. What is the river honoring? How long has it been going, and what's the purpose of it? Well,
the river honoring takes place annually on the lower Flathead River, and it's at a campsite where a group of Pend Oreille people traditionally camped, and they gathered there and hunted and fished and gathered foods and medicines. And it was historically it was in the fall. We have when we began managing it about 20 years ago, after it was initially began by Clarence Woodcock to restore that cultural and natural resource tradition, and it was difficult for the Culture Committee at that time to sustain it, so we offered to help. And it's one of the largest outdoor environmental education events in the area. We invite all of the local schools to come and participate. We invite 3rd and 4th graders to come, and they 4th and 5th graders, excuse me, to come to the campsite. We set up 18 educational stations. We set up teepees, and we invite elders to come, and natural resource managers, and they have educational stations, and we rotate between 800 and 1,000 students through the river honoring in 2 days of educational events. We have the first, it usually starts the second week in May, and on Monday evening we have a gathering where we honor people that have been that have either educated our community about the value for the river, or folks that have participated, elders that have participated, that have helped support this, the river honoring.
And I mean, there was a time when the river was under numerous environmental threats, whether it was BIA plans to log the old-growth ponderosa pines that magnificently lined the banks of that river, or proposals for additional dams below Kerr Dam, some of which would have drowned most of the river. Is part of the goal of the river honoring event to help remind people of the tremendous environmental value of this resource?
Absolutely. And what we know is that everything we do on the land affects the water. And we need to educate young people. And we believe that these young people are particularly receptive to understand the risks and the benefits. And if we can teach them about the things that we love and how important they are, they're going to be the future managers. And they'll be able to ensure for us and for all future generations that the river will continue to be 68 miles of beautiful, pristine water that run through the reservation.
And it really is an unusual resource at this point in history. There are very few rivers in the West that run so gently through such a relatively pristine landscape. And
where else do you find a river where there aren't homes all along the bank? And the tribes manage this, but there are profound threats. We have significant off-road vehicle use that are disturbing the fragile soils, that are impacting the wildlife, and especially ground nesting birds that disturb as I said, the fragile soils and introduce weeds. And so there are significant threats that the council is very concerned about. We developed a river map to help educate and inform people about the river and about the risks.
Well, hopefully that can be addressed even more forcefully in the future. I know that a lot of those ATV tracks leave almost permanent scars on that alkaline clay.
Absolutely. 10 minutes of somebody's joyride is 100 years of scarring on the landscape.
We only have a couple minutes left, but from the river honoring, I'm wondering if you can just give people a very brief nutshell view of the lake honoring.
Oh, absolutely. So every fall, usually the second week in September, we invite area high school youth to Blue Bay on Flathead Lake. And we have a number of educational stations, a smaller number, but it's a smaller number of youth for all of the schools that in the communities around the lake, all of Flathead Lake. We have Kalispell schools, we have Ronan, Polson, and Two Eagle River School that we invite to come to the lake. And we talk about lake access. We talk about water quality issues. We talk about fisheries, the interest in reducing the number of non-native lake trout and providing more habitat for restoration of native West Slope cutthroat and bull trout in the lake habitat. So we try to educate them about all of the issues of concern. These high school students, these high school youth are really going to be our future managers. Hopefully they'll be our future managers, and they'll learn the value of that, of this exquisitely beautiful lake.
It really is something of international significance in that way, recognized for its
Absolutely, and there's so little access to the lake, so little public access, and there's such profound damage. Again, the same thing is true on the lake that's true on the river. Everything we do on the land has the potential of polluting the lake.
Well, this has been a great conversation. We're just about out of time. Germaine, thank you so much for being with us. Hopefully this discussion about the lake honoring will lead to how to deal with the lake trout at the beginning of our next program. I'm happy to say Germaine's going to join us for another half-hour conversation next week. Thanks very much. Thanks, Germaine. Thanks very much for being with us. We'll see you next week.